In today's video, and the first video of 2025 for that matter, which is so awesome that we're here in the new year, we're going to be talking about very severe cold air. That's one of two topics we're going to be discussing. The other one is we have multiple potentially major winter storms to track, even the chances for East Coast blizzards. There's two potential chances out there. Obviously, these are going to flip flop quite a bit, but we are discussing all of what the models have to show us at this point as we always go over every single possibility, giving you guys the raw data and basically withholding nothing from you guys. We're going to be discussing all of these things today, but first we're taking a look at our 6 to 10 day temperature outlook from the National Weather Service. And I've been showing these just because I know there's some people in the comments that are like, nobody else is saying this is going to be happening. That's why I like to put this here. This is exactly why I put this here. So we have January 7th through 11th now, a week basically from today, and then a few days afterwards, we see this period to be very, very cold throughout the east. We can see that a lot of warmth is located over the west during this time frame, even extending up into Alaska, which has been what we've been really discussing recently because these are called positive PNAs when we see the really warm temperatures flourish over western North America. And the further north this pushes up the west coast, which again, all the way up to Alaska here, that really, really causes this cold to pour down even further south. And that's why we see this Arctic air reaching well into the Gulf of Mexico, well down into Florida. Because that positive PNA is surging so far northward, we see kind of the opposite effect taking effect eastward here. Very, very interesting. And when we look at the precipitation, I want to show you guys this. Something that is a little bit concerning for snowfall chances further inland, especially and further northward, is that the further expanded these cold air masses become, the further away from these areas the jet stream is. And we see a jet stream which really is going to be primarily located straight through the plains southward and then like over the Gulf almost, and then just offshore of the United States, something like this. Because that trough is so intense, we get a lot of dryness in the middle here. If this cooldown was a little less intense and we saw something more like this, you would likely see a lot of these areas here be in the above average precipitation column. But because of how intense this cooldown is, it's keeping these storms actually a little bit suppressed. Now, again, kind of goes against the favor of snowfall for these more inland areas. But for areas closer to the coast and for areas very far in the south, this is going to bring in an unusually high chance of seeing some snowfall during this period. Again, we have very unseasonably cold temperatures. And we also see some precipitation, especially again in these more suppressed, deeper south and east areas. So we're watching for areas throughout here, especially for some potential snowfall. The 8 to 14 day outlook here from the National Weather Service, this is for January 9th through 15th, looks very similar. And another thing kind of working away from our favor of snowfall, at least, obviously is a very frigid look. We see the surging warmth up the west coast still, well up into Alaska. This cooldown is very far south based, but now we see this warm kind of expanding eastward, and this causes the cold in the east to basically expand a little bit eastward. And now what we're kind of dealing with is, again, a jet stream that's going almost directly southward underneath the Gulf, and then probably even much further offshore of the east coast is what I suspect we're going to end up seeing, since the heart of this cooldown is well into these areas. This is gonna, again, especially for the more inland areas, but even now maybe impacting a lot of the coast as well, bring drier conditions. So let's take a look at that precipitation. And sure enough, the same thing. These areas along that jet stream way to the south are seeing the more above average precipitation, while we see dryness throughout the heart of that cooldown. So again, it's going to be a more suppressed look for the best opportunity for storms, and there's going to be a lot of cold, so this will bring about opportunities for snowfall. I'm still quite optimistic that these areas could see something pull up the coast. Obviously, we've seen the models flip back and forth. We're going to show you some models that show that today, some models that don't. That's basically what we've been talking about for 3 or 4 days straight. Again, giving you guys just the raw data and basically multiple models to look at here, so we can kind of go over some different possibilities. But when we're talking 7, 10, 15 days out, anything is really possible. So we can see huge movement, and I'm not too concerned. I think that we're going to see some interesting storms and a lot of interesting snowfall alongside this cold air. We do have a snowstorm that we're going to be talking about here in a second that is happening much sooner, more like Monday time frame. So I would say Sunday into Monday. That's going to be, within 5 days. We're highly confident in that one. The only thing is, I'm getting a little premature here, but is it going to track northward through the mid-Atlantic and bring more northern area snowfall here? Or we've seen some models also trend at it being much further south like this, and is it going to bring, again, those more deeper south areas some more interesting snowfall? That is the biggest question here at this point, but it's almost going to be moving directly across the nation, not really moving up or down, obviously not down the coast, but up the coast or anything. It's kind of just moving straight horizontally across the nation. That's going to be an interesting swath of snowfall and potentially major as well. The 3 to 4 week outlook really hasn't changed. This is for the 11th through the 24th. We've seen some validation since we've gotten a lot closer to this date that this is likely to be a cold period, especially the closer to that 11th time frame you are. We get a little bit more uncertain as we move, well into the forecast period, like 20th, 24th. But at least closer to that 10th time frame, we're highly confident in very cold temperatures. Now, we did see this come out yesterday. In case you missed yesterday's video, we do see a colder look for the overall January outlook here from the National Weather Service. Again, positive PNA, really a staple here for the upcoming January, or I guess the ongoing January now. So the rest of it, and we see that it's stretching up into Alaska. And again, what we see is actually a lot of this deep south cold air, deep diving into to the eastern United States, and that again is going to make this jet stream interesting, and the storm tracks very interesting as well to track here. Now the GFS model, we're actually going to be looking at two GFS model runs today, because I usually go with the 0Z or the 12Z runs, but I wanted to show the 18Z as well in addition to this 12Z run, because it is out currently and that's technically the most up-to-date run, but I also want to refer to the 12Z with you guys, and that's going to give you guys a good idea of the changes that we see run to run as well with a lot of these models. So let's just kind of walk through it here together. I'm going to move us straight towards Thursday on January 2nd, and we see a drier but much colder date than what we've seen as of late, as in mostly the last 3 or 4 days. So colder air moving into the east. We see this positive PNA kind of developing here as we see the warmth kind of pushing northward up the west. So we're kind of going according to plan. Nothing too crazy to write home about for Thursday. Here's Friday on January 3rd. We do see some snow showers throughout the Ohio Valley, Great Lakes, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast. But again, nothing too major. The most major storm over the United States is going to be this northwest one here, bringing some snowfall to the Cascades, Sierra Nevada, Northern Rockies as well. And then also some rainfall for those more lower elevation locations. As we move towards Saturday on January 4th, we start to see a low forming somewhere between New Mexico and Colorado. This is going to be our storm that kind of moves directly across the nation. I would say this is the mean average line of what we've seen from a lot of the model runs. We have seen, again, some more northern solutions. We've also seen some more southern solutions. I'd say north to south trends is the biggest variable at this point for this system. And a lot of this, as you can probably imagine, is going to rely heavily on how much and how deep that cold air is moving in, because if the jet stream gets pulled further south because we have more intense cold air than modeled, that's going to also bring the storm track further south as well. But if we see those temperatures come in just a tad bit milder and that jet stream not diving quite as far southward for the kind of early next week time frame, we could see this storm come in a little bit more north-based. So those are some of the variables at play. Let's see what happens as we move towards Sunday on January 5th, and we do see some snowfall throughout Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky. Also quite a bit of ice, which is kind of a trend with this system as of right now. Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, seeing quite a bit of that. Maybe a freezing rain event here on our doorsteps. We do see some potential thunderstorm activity happening here for states like Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama in here, southern Tennessee. These are all kind of some of those areas that we're watching for some of this potential more thunderstorm activity, as I mentioned, and also kind of similar areas that we've been seeing severe weather recently as well. So hopefully no more of that with this system. This is Sunday the 5th, like I mentioned, and here's as we move more towards Monday on the 6th. And again, a lot of freezing rain in here for like Kentucky, now West Virginia, northern North Carolina, as well as the mountains here. And then snowfall here, really, really trending in for Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, northern Virginia there. Going to be DC, Maryland, Delmarva as well here pretty soon also. So let's just move it forward a little bit. And we do see those areas kind of spread in. That low kind of right on that North Carolina, Virginia line is what we're seeing on this particular model run as far as the storm track is. And then the deeper cold starts to really move in for Tuesday the 7th here, Wednesday the 8th. And this is an important date because this is when our storm that we've been tracking starts to form here off the coast of Texas. Again, earlier this week, we had a lot of models bringing this up, hugging the coast basically, straight up the coast like this, bringing monstrous snowfall amounts for these areas, basically blizzard conditions with a low pressure center well into the 970s. We have seen models back away from this super charged up storm solution for right now. It still is about 10 days out from when this would be happening, so there is a lot of time to go, and we have in years past seen models really flip-flop on showing things and then, you know, stopping it and then showing it again and then not showing it. So this is going to be a roller coaster. I still think the chance is there for a very major snow system. I also think that there's a really high probability that there is at least a snow system of sorts. And again, with this one, kind of what we're dealing with here is we have some models, which we're going to kind of see here, where it's really, really suppressed to the south. And we do get snowfall for areas like North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. And on the early portion, we do see some for New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana as well. Very deep south areas, as this trough is, again, digging very, very deep, which is what we've talked about throughout this video. We're also going to see some model guidance that shows the cold air even more intense. And we basically get this system moving so far to the south that not even these areas can get that snowfall. It's basically somewhere out here over the Atlantic, just way too offshore. But there is still some models suggesting that we get a little closer to the coast here with it. And that would be enough to start to, again, threaten these areas with the possibility of snowfall. So huge variables, which is to be expected when we're talking about the 7 to 10 day range, even beyond. That should be obvious. So we're going to just continue to track these. But as we move towards Thursday here, January 9th, this is 8 days out now. We see this low is somewhere south of Louisiana. We get some ice, some snowfall here for these deeper south states. I think it's worth noting that this GFS model tends to be overly suppressed with storms. And what I mean by that is just way too far to the south. Maybe not way too, but like pretty significantly. And I would say that happens about, you know, six out of every 10 times. So we can't always completely hedge on that happening, but that does tend to be a thing that this model can do at times, especially in the long range, which would be applicable to this. So we're going to be watching for that possibility as well. I know there's so much we're talking about here today. I feel like I'm a mouthful here. By Friday afternoon, we can see that this low is relatively close to the coast, 997 there, right near like Savannah, Georgia. We do get pretty heavy snowfall here throughout states like Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, which I know would be a major, major situation for these areas, especially with this heavy of snowfall, with that intense of a system and this intensive cold air. This would be a recipe for a snowstorm unlike really anything they've seen in recent history at all for these very deep south areas. So keep that in mind. A storm that comes to mind is, I think, like 1980. We had a pretty massive snowstorm for very deep south areas. I think it was mostly like southern North Carolina and South Carolina there, not necessarily stretching into Alabama the same way as this one is, but that's a storm that comes to mind as a very deep south, very intense snowstorm. 987 there near southern North Carolina. The problem here is that we get it kind of climbing up the coast, and all of a sudden it's like, it looks like it's going to be something major. And then it kind of like flattens back off and starts to move back up offshore, basically. And what we would need for a more expansive snowstorm is something that kind of continues on that more northern trajectory. So a bit of a fork in the road, as you can see. Still a very massive system for South Carolina, North Carolina here. Doesn't really reach Virginia or anywhere north of there, and basically just continues offshore. We have a low here. This model is currently showing over the Dakotas, bringing some snowfall to areas in the northern plains and upper Midwest, which is pretty interesting. As we continue forward, we get a little tiny bit of a winter thaw here, I would say, for like the 11th, 12th, 13th, where it's a little warmer in the east. And then we cool back down, even flirting with another coastal snowstorm here around the 14th, which we're going to show you the next run, like I said, the 18Z in just a moment. And that one is going to show a little bit more out of this potential second threat here for the East Coast. So we'll be looking at that in a moment, so stick with us. But we really see nothing too much until we get to about the 15th. We get some activity trying to develop around the Gulf of Mexico. I feel like we're talking about tropics right now. We keep getting these Gulf of Mexico systems, but this really would need to be watched for another system moving into this area, especially, I mean, this is a very odd structure of the jet stream. This would maybe be more of a southern slider type pattern with that trajectory of the jet stream. But these are the types of things at, 336 hours that could change massively. So we're watching for kind of storm signals. But really, what we see is it moves straight up into the trough, which is a little unusual, and inland, bringing some ice, some snowfall, and we get to the end of the model run here, unfortunately, on the 17th, and don't really see any more, but it kind of just pulls up the warm Gulf air straight up the East Coast, which is, of course, possible. But if we had deep and very sturdy cold air in place, I doubt this would happen. Now, for the 18Z run, we're going to focus in on these two storms here, the coastal storms, because we see some pretty big differences. Here's storm number one. And again, this one, the previous run was way here by the Gulf Coast, and now we're seeing it more like closer to the Bahamas, honestly, with very light snowfall for the Carolinas here, and that's about it. So you can see how one model run difference is a massive difference here in the low location. Really, we're talking about a 6-hour difference in when these model runs came out, and we are seeing probably a 100 to 200 mile shift in the low pressure center at this point. We see that one basically move straight offshore very innocently. Again, a little bit of a thaw after it, but here comes that storm I was mentioning to you guys, where we get a little bit more out of this 14th system. It moves almost directly where that first storm came from. This time around, though, we have a new batch of cold air, and it's very new to the United States, and it's very west-based. So our jet stream is a little bit more favorable here, where it's not way out here in the southeast or way down here in the Gulf. We have a jet stream that's moving through the southeast, so this storm has great potential to move up the East Coast on this model run, of course. This is very far out, keep that in mind. We're talking something that would need to be tracked for a very, very long time, and we would likely see huge fluctuations in this every single model run. So pretty interesting stuff, but pretty far out. We see this low very close to the coast, again kind of threatening Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia here, playing into that more southeast type snowstorm. As we mentioned, the long range pattern would support a little bit more. This one wants to pull up the coast, but really, as far as the more northern territories go, I would say that the most far north we see snowfall out of this one, for the most part, would be the mid-Atlantic, maybe a little bit of southern New England here, but it basically moves offshore after that point as the cold moves in even more so. And then we're left with this at the end of the model run, where maybe another coastal system is wanting to get its act together. So very active Gulf of Mexico, very active nor'easter storm track. Very much so not what we typically see in La Niñas, I should add here. Now, the European model run for snowstorm number one, we're going to see a more northern solution here. There's a little miniature kind of Alberta clipper here we get for Iowa, Illinois, eventually Indiana, Ohio, and then a little bit here for the mid-Atlantic. But again, it's quite minor when we look at it. It's very brief, and it's probably more in just the form of snowfall showers. We get our more major low here. That's going to be, like I said, a lot further north. We see it travel to the north of that Virginia, North Carolina line, and a lot of our snowfall is much closer to Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey here as far as the East Coast is concerned. The West, however, we don't see too much of a change in where that snowfall is occurring. That one moves out. We get the coastal development here around the 10th, so we see it right here. Jet stream is basically very flat over the south. And we're going to get this storm to follow suit with what that jet stream is doing for the most part. So let's watch this play out. We see the cold air gets very deep, very intense, but it's just a little bit too far offshore. The good news here, I guess, for people that want to know is, first off, we're exactly 10 days out at this point when it would be off the southeast coast. The other piece of good news is that this is not that far off the East Coast if you're looking for snow. I mean, Again, we showed a model run where there was a much bigger change than this would be, and this would be massive amounts of snowfall right here as opposed to none. That kind of 50-mile difference in the low pressure center. So pretty big changes happen with small movements of where the low is, where the jet stream is, and the timing. And I could see us going back and forth a lot of times on seeing a major snowstorm and then seeing nothing, and then a major snowstorm and then nothing. This is going to be a roller coaster likely. As we keep going, I want to see if we get development of any sort of second system, and we really do here. This is the kind of 14th, 15th. We get another batch of this moisture, but the European model wants to start pulling the cold air away around this time, so I think that we have a little less potential if the European model ended up being correct. We really see that cold want to move away as that storm moves up. Now, as far as total precipitation is concerned, the European model, the most would be the Northwest here, as well as the deep south, where we get both of these storms forming, and relatively dry in here again along the lines of what we saw from the National Weather Service. When we look at the anomalies, it's almost the entire United States experiencing below average precipitation. Not really surprising based on the pattern that we're seeing overall. Here's the total snowfall on the European model. I guess I should move to the entire United States. I don't know why I keep doing this, but every video, but we see the Mountainous West does pretty well, especially the Northern Cascades and then the Rockies. We see the Sierra Nevada and Southern Cascades are a little bit more marginal, mostly about a foot of snowfall, so that's pretty marginal for them. Here's that initial snow system that we see. So again, pretty heavy snowfall for Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, DC, Delaware, Pennsylvania here. Probably pretty close to 10 inches for a lot of these folks. So this isn't your everyday clipper system. This is a massively intense snowstorm that we're seeing here very soon. As we move on and actually take a look at these, we see some of these amounts on screen. Again, we're seeing like 15, 20 in a lot of these spots, but I think we're going to be a lot closer to perhaps 10 once it's all said and done. And when we look at the positive snow depth change in inches, you can see that it's a lot closer to 6 to 10 in a lot of these areas, as I mentioned. So the purples being 6 to 10, pinks kind of 10 inches plus. I really like this map a lot. The reason we don't typically use this is because we want to talk about the amount of potential with a lot of these snow systems. But when we get close, it's better to talk about the actual positive snowfall depth change, because we know very likely what the temperatures are going to look like, what the ground temperatures are going to look like, and we have the finer details down. But in the long range, this type of tool is going to change so much because of what basically the butterfly effect, because this is taking into account things that happen before this even occurs, and the model has to be pretty spot on to get that right. So that's why we don't use this typically in the long range. So let's go ahead and move on. I'm going to take a look at the GFS model's total snowfall, and we are seeing a whole lot throughout the deeper south here. Let me make my pen a little bigger. So we see a lot throughout the deeper south here with this potential snow system. Again, we're going to look at the 18Z in a minute as well. But states like Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, still seeing snowfall from that one. And we also get this snow system, which is a lot lighter for the eastern seaboard in here. We see not nearly as much for these areas, but for the Ohio Valley and Midwest, we still get, again, likely 6 to 10 in there. As we just zoom in, because I want to show you kind of what the maps look like on this model. Again, a little bit longer range. We're going to use the total snowfall in this instance, but looking at, a foot to 2 feet in some of these areas, likely if we were to try to calculate what the actual accumulation would be, in this instance, it would probably be a lot closer to, 6 to 10, maybe 10 to 15 in the bullseye spots. For these deeper south areas, it's a little harder for accumulation to happen, as temperatures were likely warmer before the snowfall occurred. Same story here in a lot of Louisiana and Mississippi. But we could see some major northern trends. So I don't want anybody to get too excited in the deep south. I know this would be a historic snow event. We can see massive movement, and those movements tend to be northern in nature, northwestern more specifically. Historically, that's what the models tend to do as we get closer to things. So that would be the biggest expectation. And I mean, I guess maybe another thing boding well into the more northwest trend is that if it moves any further south, I mean, what are we talking here? Like coastal Louisiana, like the Gulf Coast seeing these numbers. So I really don't think this can go any further south with the snowfall. But hey, anything's possible. I always preach that. So I need to listen to my own advice. 18Z here again. What's interesting is we don't get the same snow system, but we actually get a kind of similar result with where sees the snowfall. We just see way less for some of these more western areas. Still, the Carolinas really cash in though here on this instance, and we see very similar things with this actual upcoming snow system that we're seeing here in just a few days. As we zoom into the east here, again, this model showing 10 to 15 for the Carolinas. This would likely be a lot more like 6 to 10 for being realistic. And then I think a lot of this in here is actually from your initial snow system. So yeah, still, even though we've seen a northern trend with this initial snow system, I think that these areas in the more middle regions do still have a chance of seeing snowfall around the Monday time frame. So keep that in mind, that if we see any sort of southern trend at all, which I just said northwest trends are more common, but southern trends do happen as well sometimes, that would put a lot of areas at risk of seeing snowfall in a hurry. But the clock is ticking for that type of thing. Keep that in mind. We are getting very close to this system. When we look here at the temperature anomalies, what we see is that we're obviously a little bit warmer still. We're going to be gradually cooling. Here's the second. Here's the third. Here's the fourth. We see more severe cold air by the fourth. Here's the fifth. Here's the sixth. All of this warmth is going to take place south of the low. So if the low moves through, like let's say Virginia here, like we've seen a lot of these models, the warmth is going to be cut off to the south of there in this warm quadrant of the storm. If the low, well, there's our daily emojis. We haven't seen those in a while. If the low is more over North Carolina, we would likely see a cutoff line much more around that area, so we wouldn't see this North Carolina warmth. So keep in mind that the low location is going to impact how this southeast ridge, that's very brief by the way, kind of reacts and acts. But we do see cold air, really brutal cold air, move in afterwards. We have seen a little bit less of those pinks. I think that models have sort of pumped the brakes. It's hard to even say that when we're still talking about 25 to 35 degrees below normal for many different states, like we see over the Midwest and Ohio Valley. But it's hard not to acknowledge that we had models showing like 50 degrees below normal just like 4 days ago. So I think that we've seen a considerable backing off of it. Obviously, we still very much so expect the brutally cold air to move in, and basically certainly expect the first half of January to be cold. It's just been a kind of slight change that we've seen trending in. So I wanted to let you guys know about that I've been kind of watching, which does actually bode a little bit well for snowfall, by the way. We talked about how the very, very intense cold air is almost like too overwhelming and causes the snowstorms to move around. If we see the temperatures look just a little less cold, we could see a lot of these storms start to trend more northward, which would be good for snow lovers overall. So there is winning in either case for the most part if you're hoping for snow. We see this cold kind of just continue on the European model straight through the 13th, 14th. I mean, we get another blast of it around the 15th, and it doesn't look like it's really ending at any point, so still no end in sight there. The GFS model, we're going to see actually a lot of the same here. So again, gets more intense towards the 4th, 5th, 6th. We see this southeast ridge. This model's a little further south with it again. So again, that kind of cutoff of the warmth and cold is a little further south as well. As we just keep going here, what we see is that cold gets more intense, but less than a few days ago, like we mentioned. We do get another blast of it around the 14th, 15th, just like the European model, and it's still there by the 17th. So really no end in sight here for the most part. As we take a look here at the European extended model's temperature outlook, here's the 1st through the 8th, so relatively cold in the east. But when we move towards that 7th through 14th time frame, this is when we hit, I would say, the peak of the cold air. So the 7th through the 14th for the southeast, and this has been the case basically the entire time we've been calling for the cold. And then the 14th through 21st does look colder, but not even nearly as much as the 7th through the 14th did. Even as we move beyond the 21st through the 28th, there's no real reason to suspect it'll be warm, but this is an averaged outlook. This is not going to look like this. This is cold coast to coast. Really what we're seeing here is because it's an ensemble model, we have like 50% of the members showing cold over here, the other 50% showing cold over here, and it just ends up being like a mess. So that's one of the problems with ensemble models, by the way. When we move on to our GFS extended ensemble model, we see 1st through 8th looks very similar. So does the 7th through the 14th. And then here's the 14th through the 21st, very similar. And then the 21st through the 28th, again, looking colder in the east overall. Finally, our CFS model, which we've been also looking at daily, here's the 2nd through the 9th, which is the earliest frame we can look at, very cold. But that 7th through 14th is the peak of it on this model as well. 14th through 21st looks colder than our previous models. And then the 21st through the 29th, or 28th, I guess, this model really kind of brings the cold back. So maybe we're going to see things get colder again. If this model is correct, that'd be very interesting. Here's the 28th through the 4th, not really looking warm. 4th through the 11th, not really looking warm. And we even get to the 8th through the 15th of February, still looking cold in the east. So very, very good signs that we're going to be seeing prolonged periods of cold. No real torches or warmer overall patterns in sight at all from anything we've looked at today, which is just so unbelievable. With all that being said, I know today's video went very, very long, but I wanted to go in depth and kind of have a really deep discussion with you guys about all of these things. So be sure to subscribe. I know we've had so many new viewers join the channel. I'm just amazed at how many of you have been loving the videos, subscribing. I mean, I am seeing it. I appreciate all of you so much. Subscribe if you haven't already. We're going to keep up the great content, keep them coming to you guys, and hopefully we're going to just walk through all of these things with you guys over the coming weeks, months, and years. I'm looking forward to all of it. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.